In 2009, Robin Williams and I shared a golf cart ride together for about 30 seconds. It was honestly one of the craziest 30 seconds of my entire life. Now you probably want to hear the rest of that story, and don't worry, I'm going to tell you what happens later on. But this is what it means to tell a great story. It means getting someone interested and excited. The first step to telling a great story is understanding the structure. And it's really simple. Every story, you probably learned this in elementary school, every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Once you know that first formula, then you can fit your stories inside of that. My team can help you, by the way, with your stories. If you're not sure about how to tell them or exactly what they are, you can head over to tripadvicecoaching.com and you can do a free call with us where we'll talk about how we can help you. And when you join our coaching program, we can actually write these stories for you, work on them together so you can be an amazing storyteller for your story specifically. So check that out, get a free call at tripadvicecoaching.com. So you know beginning, middle, and end, but let's dive in a little bit more. First, you need an engaging opener, right? So just like the story I told before, or at least the half-finished story. My engaging opener was in 2009, I shared a golf cart ride with Robin Williams, which maybe piques your interest. Now, of course, not everyone has a crazy story with this celebrity, and that's okay. It can be something even more simple, but something to make it where people are perked up. Maybe you don't tell the very beginning of the story. Maybe you start in the middle and then you go back to the simple formula of beginning, middle, and end. That way it's a little bit more engaging. Here's another example of maybe a story that's not as interesting being with a celebrity. I remember it was New Year's Eve 2012, and that might have been the longest night of my entire life. That's your opener. That will make it engaging. People will be like, well, why? Why was it crazy? New Year's Eve, that's interesting. What made it so tough? Next is the beginning, right? The beginning of the story. You need to set the scene. So once you've done your engaging opener, now you can say, okay, what was the year if you didn't say it in the engaged opener? You can say where you were, what was going on, maybe what was happening in that point of your life. And you're going to keep all this short, right? We don't need very long extended stories where you're spending 5 minutes just setting the scene. Just briefly, the who, what, where, when, get the facts so you can put the person you're talking to in the middle of that story. They can picture what's going on. So for the Robin Williams story, it would be something like, it was 2009, I was 23 years old, and I was working on this movie set because in that time I was working for a famous producer. Then you continue to the middle of your story. The middle of the story is going to get towards the climax. So you're reaching the climax of what makes this story interesting. And then in the end, you come down from that climax and you can tell about what you learned, what made it interesting, or just something that wraps up the whole story. In order to find your stories, one thing you can do is just think about what are the stories in your own life that make something a story? Well, what are things that are interesting to tell? What's something that you want to tell someone? Like I might want to tell someone the Robin Williams story because I shared 30 to 45 seconds with a massive celebrity and someone that I was a big fan of. That's a story to tell. Or maybe this made up New Year's Eve story. Something crazy happened on that New Year's Eve night that made it so long. Usually something that has high emotion in it, something that's a transformation. That's what someone told me when I did storytelling coaching, which I did a couple years ago. And the first thing they told me was this: in order to find the story, find the transformation. And that can be small or it can be big, right? So it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be this massive, because I know transformation is kind of a big word, right? But it doesn't have to be this massive transformation, something intense, just something that changed from one point to another. For me, for the Robin Williams story, I mean, it could be a couple of things. I mean, I didn't change as a person per se, but maybe a little bit. I finally got to meet someone who I saw on the screen for 20 years. So now I'm someone who actually met I wouldn't say my idol, but someone I really looked up to. And now that he's passed away, that makes it even more of a story, right? It makes it a little bit more sad. So where was their transformation? Where was their emotion changes? Where in your life are these moments? Also, keep it short. You don't want it too long-winded. Better to err on the side of short than anything else, because anything that's too long, you lose people and they're just going to remember that it was a long story. So keep it nice and short. I mean, I could tell the Robin Williams story. I could tell them 30 minutes if I really wanted to. I can go deep into the background of all the Robin Williams movies. I I used to watch and how it meant so much to me to see, him on the set of this movie and blah, 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 blah. I could also tell the story in 10 seconds. Hey, one time I met Robin Williams and I drove him in a golf cart over to set. That was probably even less than 10 seconds, right? So it's not so much I can tell you the amount or the time that's the perfect length. It all depends on what your story is. Sometimes it's a little bit better shorter. Sometimes it's a little bit better longer. Test it out. Tell these stories. Tell them to yourself. Ask yourself what parts were interesting, what parts are not. Look for the reactions when you're telling people, but always make it shorter than it really has to be. You can even play with it, right? If I told someone, oh yeah, one time I met Robin Williams, that's like 3 seconds in that story. They'll be like, well, what do you mean? You met him? Like, what happened? When did you meet him? What's going on? Right? So you can always get people more interested the shorter it might be. Here's where it all comes together, because we're talking about telling these stories to girls, not just like your friends, right? But there are moments when you can find in your story that you can use some flirtation, right? So use the story to add in some flirting with the girl. So for example, maybe this is not the best example, but one thing I found that you could say if you wanted to flirt with the girl, if I was telling my Robin Williams story, I can say to her, okay, listen, if we ever share a golf cart together, you have to promise me that you're gonna sing to me. Now you probably don't know what that means because you didn't hear the rest of my story. So let me tell it to you now. So what ended up happening was I was on set of this movie called Old Dogs, didn't do too well in the theaters, and I was driving around a golf cart around set, helping out. One of the PAs said, hey, we need you to help out. Can you put Robin Williams in the cart and bring him to set? And I wasn't really in charge of this. My job was just to be an assistant to one guy, not drive a bunch of people to set. So I was a little bit shocked that this was something that was asked of me. All of a sudden, without even me being able to react, Robin Williams comes into my golf cart and I'm shaking a little bit because this is a really big person that I've always loved and watched his movies. And for the next 30 seconds, that felt like it went by in 5 seconds, I drove him to set. And I just had to say something to him. I just couldn't go without at least saying one thing to a guy that I really admired. So I told him, and this is a true story within the story, that I ended up buying a Mrs. Doubtfire poster, but it wasn't in English, it was written in Italian. And once I told him that, he started singing an Italian opera, which of course he would do because he's a wacky guy. And then after he was done, he said, thanks for the ride, dropped him off, and that was my story with Robin Williams.